Hello once again, witchy people. I'm back this evening by candlelight with my Barclay McSquaffles. He's in here with me today. I don't know why. Did you want cuddles? Oh, Barclay. You sit there then, like a good boy. He's got his own padded chair next to mine. Anyway, so there's been once again a resurgence, a lot of videos on the internet for newbie witches, baby witches, sort of like giving advice and pointers and such like, which they are amazing. These videos are fantastic. They're a fantastic source of information, and you know, it's sort of like a witchcraft 101 for a lot of people, but not from people like me. Videos like that from people like me aren't really going to make much sense. But I would like to offer not advice as such, but my opinions or the way I see things, a few thoughts and ideas on witchcraft in general and some terms that people sort of bandy about every now and then. And the subject I've chosen for this evening is hereditary witchcraft, bloodlines, ancestry. Now, I'm not talking about ancestral work, I'm talking about your ancestors being witches, and the importance that some people place on this, and why I do not think it's important. Do I think you're born a witch? No. To a certain extent. I mean, you can be born and then raised a Christian, but then find paganism or witchcraft and find that's your home. That feels like you've just come home. So in that sense, yes, I suppose we are born witches, but you know, sometimes we take time to develop and understand what we want from life, from spirituality. But you do get a lot, and there are quite a few people who claim that they can trace their lineage back to the burning times. So I've got a hair in my eye. And I think, like I say, this is just my opinions. This is the way my thought process works, sort of along a timeline, so to speak. When people say they can trace their heritage and their bloodline back to a witch from the burning times, it always makes me slightly suspicious. 9 times out of 10, or should I say 99 times out of 100, it makes me suspicious. Because I think most of the women that were murdered as witches, you know, in the 16th, 17th, even 18th century, weren't actually witches. They were just accused women. Sometimes they were outcasts, but not always. You know, and they weren't just women. They were women. They were young, old, male, female, all sorts. Some of the most famous deaths are of men who were accused of being witches. Both in Jersey, for instance, the island of Jersey, and here, especially in the more northern areas of England. So when someone says, I can trace my lineage back to a witch from the burning times, I get suspicious, because they weren't as we perceive witches to be. I do have a friend who actually, one of her ancestors was one of the last witches to be burned in England, which is unusual, or hung in England, I can't remember, burned or hung, one of the last witches to die in England, but she doesn't claim her witch heritage from that. That just happens to be one of those things, because she knows that that woman probably wasn't a witch. So when people try to impress you with these huge numbers and lineage, you know, and oh, I can trace my family back hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years, I do get suspicious. I've actually traced parts of my family line back to the 11 and 1200s, and that's really difficult. It's extremely hard, and I don't get much information on, you know, who these people really are. You know, if you're lucky, you might get a mention in a parish register of how they perhaps passed away, or whether they were multiple birth children, you know, twins, triplets, whatever. But it's extremely difficult, and unless you're incredibly famous and perhaps appear, you know, royalty, then you're not going to be able to find much information on your ancestors, especially in the UK is it 1734, when everything, you know, when you had to register births, deaths and marriages. It's unless you're famous, you're not going to be able to find a direct descendant line. Probably. I'm not saying always the case, but most of the times that is the case. So when someone says to you, oh yes, I can trace my lineage back to a witch, that, you know, they're wrong. However, this is where the interesting part lies. To a certain extent, we all come from witches. We all come from pagans, of course. Because somewhere back in our lineage, way back in the mists of time, we all came from people whose spirituality was very nature-based and very much, you know, worshipped seasons, nature. They did certain things during certain times of year, as witches do. They celebrated Sabbats and Esbats because, you know, and prayed, or yeah, I suppose prayed to certain gods, and, you know, for their own safety during certain times of year, and for thankfulness at other times of year. So to that extent, we can, you know, most of us can trace our lines back to, well, we can all trace our lines back to some kind of ancestor who had this spirituality of a nature-based religion, a nature-based path of life. But if someone claims to state it, you know, and I can trace myself back to, and they name a famous witch, then take it with a pinch of salt. I mean, I do think this is quite a funny little story, so I'm going to add it in here just to show what it's like. Like I say, I am the family historian, the genealogist of the family, and I was given a marriage certificate of someone, and then given, Clara Holden was her name, and I was given all this information about her, and said, this woman is part of your family, and a rough sort of line of where she came from. It was on my mother's side of the family. And there, back quite a few generations, was Matthew Hopkins, the Matthew Hopkins, and I was absolutely gobsmacked that I could be related in a very distant way to Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General. Turns out that wasn't the case. It was a different Clara Holden. And yes, there may be people that are related to Matthew Hopkins, but not, as far as I know, not this one. There was a different Clara Holden who happened to have married someone called Hopkins, and the family line didn't go that way. So I was quite pleased. But it's very easy to make these mistakes. So when you want, some people say that they can trace their lines back. Are you all right there, Barclay? Trace their lineage and their lines back to a well-known, famous or definite witch. They do it because they want the credibility of it. They want that the history and the basis that their line, their knowledge is older perhaps than someone else's, and I think that must make them quite an insecure person. Like I said, I'm sure there are people out there who can trace their lines back, but when they say they trace them back to a witch who was burned or a witch who was hung, that's doubtful, because those people on the whole weren't actually witches. So, like I say, take it with a pinch of salt. Don't be intimidated by people. Think about it first. And that's my best piece of advice. My other piece of advice is don't sit in a hot room and do a video with candlelight, because it makes you feel rather warm. So there you go. Think about things that people tell you, and if people are saying things to try and impress you or to try and give credibility or depth to their path, then they're not, I'm not going to say they're not a witch, I'm going to say that they are insecure in their craft and perhaps not too sure of themselves, that they need to make up something to give themselves a basis, to give themselves a footing in something that we, you know, you don't need to prove yourself in. You don't need to prove yourself to be a witch, okay? And if people do expect you to claim your heritage and prove yourself, you know, tell me where your lineage goes, you don't need to tell them, because it's none of their business, for a start. And secondly, like I say, somewhere along the line, there was a witch. They may not have been called a witch, but they were a witch way, way back in your past. So that's it. That's my happeneth worth today, this evening, on just, like I said, not advice, just a train of thought. And, you know, that's it. All I've got to say, really. Thank you for watching, witchy people. I'll be back very soon. Bye for now.